police department. The bottom line is, and again, give all the department heads credit, when COVID hit, everyone dropped down and was able to come in below the estimated budget as steeply as they could to try to create as strong of a cash position as of July 1st of this year as we could. Right.
That top line number 363, is that a gross number or a net number?
That's both. There's no variant. There's no gross or. I mean, what do you mean? Why are you trying? What net are you talking about?
Are we saying that we're going to lose enough officers that we're going to be at 363?
No.
Are we saying we're going to lose some and gain some and still be at 363?
No, we're saying that the net impact of all personnel so far this year, changes to the police department, has resulted in that department being projected under. So it's a net of all the employee impact so far for that department.
Plus and minus.
Plus and minus.
That's a net number.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, are we willing to accept that number?
No, and you know, we're working on it aggressively. I know Randy and Chief Gray, you know, I know Chief Gray and Chief Doan are interviewing and doing their recruiting as best they can. And so everyone is working on it on the HR side to make sure those positions get filled. They are under their allotted amount, their approved positions, but they are aggressively trying to fill those. And we hope to even have another presentation Monday night for you for that department for a potential add to the staff, hopefully.
Because we're almost back to full
You're
staff.
approaching that number, yeah.
And full is defined by?
Chief Gray could speak, but I think it's 36 or 34 positions, one of the two. We are vacant. We are down two positions I know of.
The last time I talked to the chief about that, he said relative to our size, it was 40-some, 41 or 40.
Right.
Well, that's what he wants and needs, but
Right.
Well, and I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, if our chief is saying we can't meet our needs with 36,
Right.
we need to have a conversation about that.
Yeah.
Well, we can't. So I think one
It's
of the
per
problems we have
capita,
right
though.
now is we can't get 36 people on board right now. We're still trying to get to that number of actual employees. So regardless of what's approved, you know, we're still trying to get to 36 in terms of active officers on the street. The other thing is that we have to be willing to overhire in some of those departments, anticipating turnover. So we know that we're going to have 10% turnover in X department. So overstaffing that when you have an applicant that comes in that's qualified and having that more of a continual hiring process to put yourself in a position to absorb that impact without affecting services is wise in some departments, right? The fire department, for example, would be wise to do that in, and so would the police. So would a couple of the utility departments as well.
Well,
So we would advocate for that and try to budget for that.
I don't want us to set a number that says, you know, we're just trying to hit the middle.
Right.
And I understand what you're saying per capita. We have to recognize in this community that we are not a community of 17,000 people.
right,
We're a community that on any given day, it's
150.
a whole lot more. And
Yeah.
as I have learned, you get a lot of folks coming into this town that add to the problems, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and what the compensation study, and Randy's getting that assembled so that we can present it, and a proposal on how to implement that, because that's a big number if you do it all at once, right? And so what our goal with that will be is to create a situation where we can get to 36, and then you can make a decision on whether or not you go to 38 or a bigger number, right? But until you get to 36, it's a moot point. So hopefully, as we get through the compensation study, that we'll start to trend towards 36 locked in, and then we can see where we need to be. Right now, we're just trying to get 36.
Well, and doing the compensation and And then on top of trying to add more officers, that's a really big number. And I know we need it, but that's a big number.
It does, it does add up. It is
And I understand,
very big number.
And I understand what you're saying, but as I was taught long ago, you know, we are about services to the citizen. And one of the basic services, in addition to water, is protection.
Well, you can hear it going on out there right now. And that's, you know, in their defense, I don't know if that's intentional or not. I don't know if they saw some.
They heard us talking about
the
it.
YouTube feed, and somebody run a siren real quick.
I find it interesting that in addition to the regular salaries being down, overtime was also down. Usually you'd think, you know, if you were understaffed, that your overtime hours would, overtime expenses would be substantially higher, but that's interesting. I'm not sure what it says, but I find that to be interesting.
Two, you got to keep in mind, a lot of our
Yeah.
there's a portion of the overtime that's built in for court. For example, if court is on Tuesday and the officer works third shift, then they have to be there on Tuesday, right? They don't have the choice not to be there. And so that is got built-in overtime. You got to keep in mind with COVID, the courthouse has been closed. And so there's been issues like that that's affected overtime substantially too.
But are you saying,
Right.
Mr. Cottle, that you're surprised that number is only 11,000
On,
overtime?
No, the
Yeah.
number's not 11,000,
Not
it's
11.
92,000 year-to-date.
right.
A lot of activities got canceled that they would've got, excuse me, they would've gotten overtime paid for too, but due to COVID, a lot of things didn't take place, road
So-
races.
So when you look back historically at the second line, which is overtime, your spend is somewhere between 150 and 200 and, say, 10,000. In fiscal year 20, you spent 171,000. And so right now, we're expected to spend $139,000 in overtime. And that is down slightly because you're not going to court, to be honest.
Okay.
And that's my opinion. But I've not gotten into it yet with Chief Gray because, you know, like I said, we were just getting these pulled
Right,
together for
right,
us.
yeah.
Right. And I'm sure he may have more keen insight on that than I do.
Well, the 10-hour shifts help with that too, I think.
It does, yeah.
And,
Yeah.
but,
And the built-in overlap of that.
and to the mayor's point, not to belabor it, but we quickly found out through
Yeah.
becoming a vaccination site with Ephraim that they're servicing 155,000 people.
Yeah,
And that's our number. You know, that's our number. We have to police that. We have to offer fire protection.
yeah, no special events in court is down. So there's not any overtime for special events either. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
knew
yeah,
court
that's
was
true,
down.
too.
I knew that was impactful. So I appreciate that comment.
But, yeah, but we service 150,000 people daily.
Yep.
And if you read the newspaper on the accidents and arrests, most of them are not from Danville. That's what, and I get what you're saying. That's what we're policing.
So the next page is fire department. Same thing with them. They have some vacant positions that's contributing to their under at the top line. We're hoping to fill those. One of those, for example, is the fire marshal position. Down at the bottom line too, the sick leave buyback, which is your retirement. We had no projection of any firefighter retiring this year, but we budgeted $150,000 for that. We're not going to spend that. You know, those two numbers produce a pretty heavy variance in your favor. Then the roll-up cost tied to the vacancies, which is your FICA and your other costs, results in a fairly substantial number under on the payroll side. And so the bottom line for the fire department is last year when COVID hit, they were able to drive their costs down $312,000 below budget, and give those guys credit for that. And then, which was a bigger number under the actual budget that had been passed. The year we're in, because of some of the vacancies, we expect them to be well under budget, as much as 20% under budget, which is another big number. So what that means is when those two departments come in under like that, and just to repeat this, and to be clear, that means that your cash balance will be stronger at the end of the year.
Did the study that was done have anything to do with coming under budget?
The CPSM study is not complete. They are coming in town, I want to say in April, for the police department, I believe.
So
And
we're going to wrap that up soon?
which one?
Next year.
Yeah, I was going to send an email. I got that on a note on my desk to send an email out to you guys for an update. 21st through the 22nd of April. Yeah.
And that-
So
is
they're
that a-
working on it, but very patiently. But in their defense, some of their travel was restricted because of COVID too.
Right. But they're going to be able to wrap that up since they can visit now?
We are asking them to do that, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The next one is 911. Last year, they came in just a tick below their projection, which was under budget. And the year we're in, we expect them to be under budget as well. Part of theirs is they have 2 vacancies now.
So we've got vacancies in 3 areas that are critical to us.
Yep, which is why we're doing the compensation study, keep that in mind. That will help repair some of those things.
Time is of the essence, in my opinion.
Code enforcement did a good job with controlling their costs. They did not have the vacancies that some of the other departments had, but they have done a good job by mitigating expenses otherwise. In the fiscal year that concluded, they were able to drive their costs down below the budget as well by $165,000 by basically just quit spending money. Then in the year we're in, we're also looking at an under budget number for those folks.
So when we talk about quit spending money, spending money on what? I mean, what were they spending money on before that they could cut out for now, or have they cut out something now that's going to cost later?
It's easier to explain it in the utility side, for example, but it's PM. I mean, you're trying to limit your expenses in reaction to, you don't know where your cash is going to end up.
Right.
Right? So our reaction in the spring of the last year, which is why everyone took a pause to activities that was unnecessary, right? So we did not seek, so for example, when you exercise a water valve, that's not expensive to do that, but sometimes you can cause damage by doing that. So we just don't do that right now, right? Now, the valve still works, but you still want to exercise it on a semi-regular basis. Every couple of years, you want that valve to open and close so that you know that it does work. But by exercising that valve, it can start leaking, right? So we don't want to cause that problem and cause that dig up. You can also cause a water leak as you're opening and closing valves. You can cause a water hammer, and you can cause a water leak. Well, that's a repair cost. That's overtime, or that's repair clamps and things like that. So rather than doing, we did not do any unnecessary work at the end of the fiscal year last year when things shut down. We stopped doing that. We did necessary work only, and that was systematic across the city. Some
And-
of the work stopped, for example, in code enforcement, whenever the governor said, we're not doing code enforcement.
Right.
Right? Or we're not doing cutoffs. So all of that contributed to the below budget from last year. So there's not that we are doing things that we don't need to do. We need to go back to doing those things.
And so, to your point, thank you, as we go back to doing those things, then while we love to see these variances to the good,
Right.
that's going to go away.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Just want to make sure we all know that.
Yes, sir. And we'll get in that a little bit on revenue. And then the timing, I'm going to bring this gentleman's presentation up, which is going to be a lot of charts. I'm going to share it with you, and you're going to be welcome to read it. It is very complicated. But at the end of the day, just to before we even get there, the projection generally is that things will start getting back to normal financially, in terms of city revenue and city expenses, not necessarily outside on the street, right? Our revenue will end up, according to the data that the gentleman provided through KLC to us, was that we're going to end up at about 90% of our revenue FY19 by the third or fourth quarter of this year, which will mean we will have come back to a recovery from our standpoint. So by then, we would expect to see the demand for our normal services increase. As things open up, we will increase the demand for services for all the city operations, right? And our demand will ramp up and our expenses will ramp up then theoretically with that demand. Does that make sense? So it's easier to communicate with water. I go back to that. So if someone needs a gallon of water, then we have to generate a gallon of water, so therefore we have to pay for a gallon of water, but therefore you'll have revenue for a gallon of water. So as the demand for more water increases, for example, all of that cost rolls up, your revenue will roll back up, all of those things roll back up.
So if we are back 90% by the end of the third quarter?
Third quarter to fourth quarter of this year is what's projected.
Then that would imply that we're going to be ahead or over 100% for the full 4 quarters. Is that what we're saying?
For the next fiscal year, based on the information that I was exposed to, given the pent-up, Marty mentioned it yesterday on our meeting, there is a lot of cash sitting in banks that's looking for a home, as quote-unquote.
Yeah.
As that, and this gentleman considered that in his presentation, as that hits the market, as we open things up, quote-unquote, as the government opens up our operations, we fully expect to have a very healthy recovery based on that information that we can gather, right? And so then we would expect to have revenues over by the end of the next fiscal year what we would have normally projected because of that pent-up demand. And so next year's budget will look a lot more normal. So it will look a lot more like FY20's budget. It will have a little bit higher expenses. It will have a little bit higher revenue projection for next year probably.
So
now, we will try to be conservative with that so that we're under, but the pent-up demand indicates that if we're conservative with our expenses and revenue, we will beat both those numbers.
So the reality is that you won't match one for one. The reality is that for every dollar of increased revenue, you're going to have an increased cost.
That is correct.
It could be more revenue over cost. It could be cost over revenue. Mm-hmm. Impossible question to answer, but if you had to take a guess, which is going to lead the way?
You're going to be at a one-to-one if you implement the comp plan. So if you really get into your compensation and try to add staff and try to create the environment that you're a preferred employer, which is what we should be, to be honest with you, we should have a high standard, then you're probably going, regardless of you're going to probably end up at a one-to-one. And I think, to your point, though, I think naturally revenue would be higher than our cost in that situation.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Hold you to that.
Well, I mean, that's, you will get the same report I got. And to be honest with you, one of the slides, and I don't want to get into it right now because it's kind of feeding it but without the slide up there. But what's interesting, though, is the global impact of the vaccine. And so in the United States, at the time of the study, which was the end of January, the United States had received something like 40% of the global vaccines. And our curve is totally flattened out compared to Europe and in other parts of the world. And you can see the impact of the vaccine, both on transmission and also active, just catching it cases, right? And so the prediction is that will mean that we will recover a lot more quickly because we will be opened back up more quickly. And you can see the spike in Europe is not necessarily strand-based. According to the statistics, it's the lack of vaccine case. It's because people are not being vaccinated at the rate they are in the United States. And the data bears that out, right? So I'm not saying I know. I'm just saying
Right.
what the guy showed on the screen made sense to me, being a layperson.
It's all kind of fortune telling in a way. I mean,
It is.
You're basing it on as much good data as you have, but that's why, like, 5-year forecasts are interesting to look at and maybe a good guide, but they're
Yeah, it's a
tough to stick
prediction.
with, but-
And so that's why I did make the comment. If you want to see different information, just tell us, and we'll try to generate whatever that is. But we do want to generate the 5-year projection. Once we get the full budget assembled, then we will start to do some of those things.
And the other question is, how often should I be exercising my water valve? I did not know I was supposed to do that. Do you run it, or?
You can do that all you want. It doesn't matter, as long as you want to pay for the water.
Put it on a row machine, or, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, and I would venture to guess, tell me if I'm wrong, that actually our water, with the exception of people not paying, our water revenue was probably up because people were home and more and using more water.
It should be at least stable, and
Yeah.
it does indicate that. There's one, I'll show you when we get back there to it, and we'll talk about
Okay.
that, yeah. So this is public services, the next slide, which is, public works, public services, which is everything we do, beautification. And they also, came in under budget last year, came in under the actual budget, and are projected to be on budget basically this year, what we would consider on budget this year. Because these guys have not stopped, right? Like, they have continued to work and continue to act like that, for example, we put in the parklet last year. We didn't have to do that, but we did anyway, right? And so we are trying to let Public Works and continue to operate normally, which is why their budget's so much more narrow than the others.
Yeah, there's a slight increase in contractual expenses. Is that just kind of a normal inflationary thing, or it's not a whole lot, but?
That's your contracts that you've bid. So those are based on your beautification contract, your mowing contract. We're picking up a little bit more mowing too every year with that.
Is this the department with the trash issue where our partnership with the county? to pick
No,
up trash?
I'll show you where that would be here in a
That's a
second.
different department?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks.
I'll show you where that charge would be, and we'll talk about that
Okay.
like 2 sheets from now. So the next one is your community agencies. It's going to be flat. It's going to be on budget, to be honest with you. I didn't even highlight the columns because it is normally dollar for dollar.
And I'd like to remind us all that we started a philosophy, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, where we said to the agencies, we've got other budgetary demands, and we're going to begin a process of scaling back. I'm not sure we've done a very good job of that.
I was gonna say, we talked about 25% over 4 years, so that eventually most of these would be at 0. We did not follow that at all, and actually, I think the first couple of years that increased.
Yeah, you can
And-
see that.
Yeah. So the request for that gets bigger every year, but our allowance for that gets smaller every year.
And I think the way we do it invites an increase.
It does.
And I'm just gonna throw this out for consideration, that's all. But maybe one way to do this, to follow what we said, is to freeze the organizations that we funded last year, less 25%.
The amount, 25%, not less organization?
Less, no, yes, each organization will get 25% less,
That sounds.
yeah.
Do other cities do this?
No.
I didn't think so, okay. Some do? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a small,
Yeah, and
they get, each commissioner gets like
Okay. That's neat.
No, no, thank you. You talk about political card.
And the ones that do,
They
it's
got
a very,
bigger
it's a very few
Yeah.
amount of agencies.
Okay.
And most of them that do, I would say, have bigger budgets. And there is something called economy of scale.
Yeah, so think through that.
What's the
and-
budget
and-
amount for this year?
You know, continue to develop your philosophy, and you know, you're looking at, what is it, the 18th or I'm sorry, the, 15th of April will be when we talk about creating the fund balance for, so you can create a situation where you have a set aside for the community agencies, or, you know, you think about that philosophy, because at that meeting in April is when we will need that philosophy communicated, and then we'll have to establish how we do the community agencies at that meeting.
And we also have not done a good job of having them come before us throughout the year, and not just at budget time when it's time to ask for money.
Right.
We've not done a good job of that. I want to see these people at least at 6 months. I would like to see quarterly, but that's probably impossible. But you know, when the county allocates their money to the very few agencies, they send them a letter and say, this is when you come before us.
Yeah, we can do that, and I think that's a good idea, but so we had, EMS here last commission meeting, right? So that makes your commission meetings a little bit longer, but we asked him to come because he'd never really, it's important that everyone in the community understands who he is and what their role is.
Yeah.
And what he believes and what he's trying to accomplish. He is not a city employee, but he provides services to the city, right? To the citizens inside of the city. So when in talking to the fire chief and him, we felt like it was appropriate that he come and reintroduce himself to the community, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And so we will continue to do that, so if you've noticed, we've tried to have staff come and talk to you and just make that a continuous process. It does add some time to the meetings, which I think is necessary, personally. Right. No. And so the department heads, I think, have done a good job of being concise and trying to present information to you. So we're going to circle through those folks on a regular basis.
Well,
And then we will add, go ahead.
We keep changing our mind too, because we had, to me, some of these ones get $1,000 or less, $2,000 or less. It'd be nice just to have them do a semi-annual or quarterly report, just a paragraph or two to submit to us at a meeting rather than just come in. What is the amount, the total that's budgeted for this year? We're in the 2021 fiscal year?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
And so the budgeted amount is?
77,000. Now, we will, and we are anticipating at least one budget amendment to come hopefully in April. It likely could be the first meeting, but will likely be the second meeting. Part of it is to account for the acquisition of Jenny Rogers. But one of the other things we will do is ask you to consider a couple of things. And I know that we've gotten a letter from the Senior Citizen Center talking about how much the food impact has been on their budget. We cut them pretty good last year as a city, and their number is in that agency line. So last year, the community agencies were cut basically from $200,000 down to $77,000. I would submit to you that one of the agencies that, especially in the time of COVID, that we should consider, and we would request that you add money back to, is Senior Citizen Center, and also the garbage. Commissioner Holland, when you were mentioning that before, that is a actual fiscal relationship that you have with the county. You are joint owners of the old landfill.
Yeah, I don't think senior citizens should be lumped in with this group.
Well, we can look at that a little bit differently, maybe put them below the line, but especially in the year we're in, we do want to carry the director, which has been Grant, carry his letter to you, and allow his request to come forward in the way of we need additional dollars. their meals, not to defend him, but their meal count has gone from you know, like, what
Oh,
was
I-
it, 20
yeah.
or 30
Oh, yeah.
per
I
day
don't doubt
to
that he's-
200 per day.
Yeah.
And I think the services they are providing in the community are essential.
And
There
their
you go.
adult daycare's basically been shut down also, which is what their revenue, a lot of their revenue is.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, I feel like they are, you know, more in line with, I don't know if I don't see the airport on
The
here, but
intergovernmental
they're more
stuff.
of an obligation for us in a joint
Yeah.
funding entity. And I've always said I don't think they need to be on this list. They need to be separate.
Okay.
Line item 7221. Does that still exist?
No, they closed
No, they closed.
permanently.
Okay.
Yeah, so some of those names are just on there, and
Yeah.
You can take that budgeted item out, though.
How many agencies does the county do you think? Just
Whole
small,
lot
though?
less.
Yeah, it's
Whole
not very
lot
many at all.
Okay, just essential and then, okay.
Well, some of it's also that some of these things just do business, if you will, in the city, so the county doesn't feel like it's their
Oh, okay.
place, so.
Yeah, that's a
but-
good point.
family services, I think, they do county and city or just city? I don't know that
I
answer.
thought
not
they
sure.
were county.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but they do, even if that wasn't the case, Ginny, they do fund fewer than we do.
Yeah. So then the next one is non-departmental. This is where a lot of your transfers go, are allocated or appropriated. For example, the Parks and Rec expenses are in there, the municipal aid transfer, streetscape would be in there, parking, garbage, museum, the others. Your contingency is in there, which you didn't spend last year. Your EDP's funded there. Hope that makes sense, but
There's your
that one,
airport board.
typically, you will come at just under budget or right at your budget normally.
So would it make more sense to put senior citizens on this list?
I would like to look at
Yeah.
those types of things.
Yeah,
and-
okay,
And we will,
okay.
yeah.
What about, and this is going to be from left field, I've had some people wonder about spraying for mosquitoes again. Is that something that the state initiates and we just tag on to? They just haven't
Normally,
been
yeah.
doing it, but
Yeah.
What is
Okay.
it, Kevin?
we used to spray for mosquitoes
Oh, gotcha.
citywide, and
That's a fact.
actually it
And
was a good service.
It actually went away about in 2011 or 12 is when the state started doing that.
So they do it solely state function.
Yeah, we've not had an expense there for a long time.
Yeah. I didn't know if it's just because we didn't see fit to, or if there was some other reason, so, okay.
Now, you have one line there at the bottom. We took $140,000 out of that one line that, and put that towards the November compensation implementation. The next one is just debt service. It's, is what it is. It's going to be flat, but the items are identified on the left. Then we'll get into municipal aid. Some of these I did not provide an analysis on because you're going to make your debt service payments, so you're going to be at 100% there typically.
Can we go back
Yep,
to non-departmental?
okay.
7921, it's under Economic Development Initiative. The local economic incentive, what is that? $10,000?
I forgot what that was. wasn't tied to the implementation of that. I will have to go back and
Okay.
detail what that, it was $10,000 for the audience, $10,650 in FY '20. But I will have to go back and
Okay.
investigate. We had anticipated that though, because it was included in the budget. And so I can't recall what that was.
Yeah, I remember having some conversation, but I don't remember what that was exactly.
Yeah.
If you could just clear that up, I'd appreciate it.
Ashley, would you write down things like that for me, so I don't? It's in non-departmental. It was the 7921 purpose. Thank you. So then moving on to debt service, then we got municipal aid. The municipal aid budget is most impacted by COVID in that the revenue that we receive from the gas tax, line 4940, if we look at the trend of that, it took a steep nosedive. So in the year we are in, we are not anticipating paving the full amount. So your last FY21 columns, the budgeted versus the expenditure, we're not going to try to get to the $500,000 number. We'll try to save back. Money in the municipal aid that we do not spend in that fiscal year goes towards the fund balance exclusively for future municipal aid work. It's got a specific purpose. We can't pull that into the general fund for other purposes. And so we'll try to grow that fund this year and save some of that in case that number, the line 4940 stays down longer. Because to be honest, our paving costs probably are in line with $450,000 versus the 157. So, you know, if that number doesn't recover, then our paving opportunity is going to diminish a lot.
For the public's sake, can you explain where this money comes from?
That is the city's contribution of allotment out of the gas tax funds that department or that operation. We pave almost exclusively out of that.
I'm trying to remember what the legislature's done so far on that. Did they do anything on it?
I don't think they did.
I don't think they did.
I don't think they did.
So one number in there, and we'll clarify this, is the operating transfer to the general fund. That is compensating the Public Works Department for fixing potholes. So that is a municipal eligible expense. That enables the city to buy asphalt using this money for pothole repair. Police Safety Fund is just a balanced drug forfeiture fund. Would point out in the drug forfeiture is that if you look at the historical trend of your actuals, you're looking at last year 3594. The year we're in, we are estimating 22,955, but you're already at 15,303. So it's a very high year in terms of drug forfeiture, which is probably indicative of folks being home and having a higher incident rate, in our opinion. Streetscape, not a lot to tell there. We are actively working on the Streetscape project, so you'll see down on line 7145, the expenditure estimated of about $150,000 out of Gresham Smith's contract designing Main Street. Some decisions will have to be made tied to that. How do you implement that project? We are getting a second round of CARES money, and so that second round of CARES money is significantly more restricted in terms of its use, and it's geared towards infrastructure or direct COVID cost. So if you were using that for infrastructure, is a part of Streetscape would be eligible, perhaps the utility side. So it may be something that you help seed a Streetscape project with. But we're evaluating that. You're not getting it all at once. You're getting it 2 phases. So you'll get some in the fiscal year, some additional money in the fiscal year you're in now, and then some in the fiscal year for next year. So the year we were in, we did get CARES money. We got a good chunk, and that was seen as revenue replacement. And so that's how we utilized it internally. That's how so it contributed just to our cash balance to help offset the loss of revenue. Moving forward, the CARES Act 2 is seen as infrastructure, so that's how we will have to gear our expenditure of that money, right? And so it will be a pass-through. It will be seen as more of a grant opportunity towards some future construction project. And there is a note that says water sewer for it, so we're not really sure if to what extent you can do general fund projects with it. It may be more of a utility fund expenditure to offset capital construction, but it's designed to fund your capital construction, which helps kickstart the economy.
Any idea how much we might get from that?
$3.1 million plus or minus, but
Okay.
it occurs over 2 payments,
Okay.
right? So again, you'll get half that in the fiscal year you're in, and half that in the next fiscal year. You do have the wastewater plant on the books right now that's being advertised. You have a major sewer line that we've talked about. You do have the Spears Creek pump station that needs the plan should be ready to go to the Division Water soon, which means we could bid that as well. So and of course, you're already working on the water line out Perryville Road, and so that's funded with a KAA.
In other words, it's all gone.
It's already spent.
Yeah.
Sorry, spent.
But then too, you've got an additional center sewer overflow work that you could do, construction work. And so you have opportunities to spend that money in water and sewer if that's where it needs to be, without really pulling a lot of muscles to get there. I mean, they're legitimate expenses. Yes, sir.
Can we go back to Streetscape?
Yes, sir.
You know, this 465,000, 470,000, what did that go for?
I'm sorry?
What did that go for?
Which-
Under line item 7145? 465, 470,
The Streetscape project on Main Street, on Third Street, those are the costs to do those projects. That is where the cost for those Streetscape projects are booked. And so right now, we're designing a project,
right?
and so you have the design expenses in the estimated year end, which is, we estimate, portion of those design expenses being $150,000 a year. We'll finish out that contract after July 1st. So you'll have some money in the proposed budget to finish out at least that design contract. We had set aside $900,000 to do the Main Street construction. We did not do that because of COVID. We did not even attempt to do it.
So, on the last piece of the puzzle for Streetscape, what would you estimate that number to be?
We do not know yet, and I don't want to underestimate it. And so you're going to have tough decisions to make that are expensive
But you
So-
could use part of that 3.1,
to offset.
if not all of it, well, not all of it, but.
You can't use all of it, you can use a portion of it. So some of the streetscape project would be eligible for the CARES money
Yeah.
based on the text that I've read, not all of it, right? But in terms of the scope of that project, should you bury utilities on Fourth Street, right? That is the biggest eyesore downtown right now, to be honest with you, in terms of just the aesthetic contribution it makes is a negative, right? And so if you bury that utility, it might be $750,000 to $1 million just to bury that utility down through there, because of where you have to go, what you have to build to support that. You know, you have to do. There's a major crossing at Walnut where you have two major feeds cross on the overhead lines. So things like that will be decisions you'll have to make when we get into the final streetscape project scope.
Okay.
And when will that be, the final scope, do you think?
Through the summer. So if we project their design be substantially complete by June.
Okay.
So you'll have that. That will just be ongoing as we go through the budget process.
I've had a lot of people, this is kind of off subject, looking downtown, if the owners could just put their trash cans up promptly, I think that would make things look better for free.
Yeah. Well,
If this is even related, but anyway. you're talking
no,
about,
it is.
you know.
And we're trying to, there's opportunities that we've been trying to work with some of the downtown owners to do dumpsters in lieu
In the
of
back?
cans in the back. But
Yeah.
a lot of those dumpsters would end up being on private property.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are trying to work through that process where a landowner is willing to give up space for a dumpster. And, you know, that can be a hard sell too if it's a parking space for them in the back.
Yeah, well, maybe through codes or something, say, hey, you gotta put it up by a certain time.
Well,
'Cause
I
they
think
get
that's already,
stinky
Yeah, it's
and-
in
that's
there.
already supposed
That-
to be enforced.
Right.
We
So
already
that
have
is a rule?
those. We have those rules.
Oh, okay.
Part of the problem is some of the structures, the way they are, don't really have a nice place to put them.
Yeah.
That's not visible,
Yeah, but some leave them out all day and night, and anyway.
especially on the weekend.
I just get a lot of comments about that, and I thought, well, you know, should be free just to put it away, and,
Does the commercial, what's considered commercial areas have everyday pickup still, or is that not? It used
Main
to
Street
be
has
on.
every day.
yeah. so that's why
Okay,
they're out
it
there
used to
every
be
day.
more than Main Street that you if you were a commercial business, you got everyday pickup.
And I think if you get expanded
I know.
coverage outside of residential, then you're paying for that separately. I think our service is limited to the cans at that point. If you have a dumpster in your commercial business, you're paying for that separately.
Right.
That's not provided through our contract. And so if the can cycle doesn't support you, then you're gonna get a dumpster anyway, by nature.
Have we asked them if they would be willing to share dumpsters across
Well,
more than
that's-
one
that-
business?
That's one of the conversations, yes. So that's exactly what I was meaning for downtown.
Yeah.
If we get common dumpsters in strategic locations, you can eliminate some of the cans. And then those dumpsters can be picked up daily more efficiently too. And so, yeah, that's a conversation we're trying to have. Yeah.
Okay.
The next budget is made up, is Parks and Rec's budget. It's got three main pieces to it. We've broken it out for Millennium Park, the fitness center, and the pool. We broke it out with an estimate of cost on those items for the,
You gotta go through about 4 pages, I think, to get there.
we've skipped through Streetscape, and the next page should be Millennium Park at the bottom.
At the bottom, it
Very
says,
bottom.
Millennium Park.
Millennium Park, page 1.
You got Millennium Park Fitness Center and pool. The combination of those three is really the Parks and Rec operating budget. That is an estimate right now, and the budget was an estimate. We are building that. And so as we go, this is information for your view now, specifically because everything was closed. They're going to come in under budget with some of the expenses for all three components, cost components. There's another one, community parks, that they did not do anything in this year either because they were closed, but it was a small amount. We are going to try and continue to tidy that budget up as we go forward so that we actually have better information. Right now, all the information we're really starting with is the as of February numbers and our actual budget that we were guessing from, right? So we really don't have any cost history. We are starting from scratch July 1st of this year and building that history as we go forward.
What impact will Jenny Rogers have on that? We talked about selling the Bunny Davis Center, and is that stuff we see happening this fiscal year or
We are going to
down
give
the
that
road?
an aggressive tact on planning the facilities that has been acquired to support Parks and Recreation. For example, the fairgrounds. So this is the last year that the fair will be out there. So now we have Jenny Rogers, so we have to aggressively pursue those components of the Parks and Rec master plan in the year we're in, so that we got a plan and that we're implementing that plan beginning, sometime in the next fiscal year.
Okay.
Right. And that will mean that we'll probably have to do some concept plans and some things like that through the summer. And some of that probably will occur in the fiscal year we're in. But that is a high priority for Josh.
And if they
And,
don't,
and Evan, I'm sorry.
that's all right, no, I was gonna say to the fairgrounds, if they don't have a location and we don't have construction going on, we'd be still willing to lease it out to them, rent it to them for the fair, right?
Yep, that's
That was
correct.
part of
I
our
think-
agreement too, I think.
Right.
They found some land, correct?
That's my understanding. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So the next budget is 2-page. That's the cemetery. You have revenues and expenditures. We did have some vacancies in that department, which does contribute to under for them across the board. Under in the last year is really because of COVID, and this year it's because of vacancies in positions, in our opinion.
We just can't close the fitness center part? Is that the whole thing or just the downstairs,
The fitness center is the facility, not the pool.
just everything?
Yeah, yeah. There is some creative solutions, and the Parks and Rec Master Plan did indicate shared resources in the community that we need to be having joint conversations with, and we will 100% do that, and we will bring the result of those conversations to you guys to consider and think about and contemplate yourselves. So that process will not be Earl and somebody else drawing something on a piece of paper. We may generate a piece of paper to look at, but that will be a healthy discussion with all the community partners identified in the master plan. And a lot of those will not be public hearing style meetings. It will be just individual business style meetings. Stormwater is similar to Public Works. We did try to keep working, but, you know, its activities restricted. A big piece of their savings too is that the work with the full plan has been slowed because of COVID, because of the ability to get out and have public hearings and meet and do those things. We are actively working on the stormwater program now and actively working on reinvigorating that program that was really delayed. We lost, you know, 18 months of healthy stormwater work. The next one is the garbage.
Earl, let me back up a moment if you don't care. On
Yes, sir.
cemetery operations.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything in here about what our design or what we intend to do with the lot we purchased adjacent to the entrance?
So there has always been contemplated a stormwater issue there. We have a plan for that. Once we implement that plan, then we're gonna open it up and sell it. I mean, we're gonna get it platted, and we'll bring that to you for your final approval, and you know, that's the plan, is to sell lots there, because we are restricted with lots. And so we do have some in the back, but we are running out, and we do need to get that surveyed and get that into the market.
Let's keep in mind, we've got a cemetery master plan.
That is correct. Yeah, and the
When do-
guys are working from that.
When do you think we would get this stormwater issue corrected?
We,
We've been talking about it for now about 4 years, 3 years.
yeah, the last, what is this year? Last summer, we really found a couple ideas that had not been there before. So we do think we have an much easier solution now than we had 14 months ago, right? So we are working now that, as we're freeing up, now that Josh is here, we've given that to him in the last 2 weeks. And so he is actively working on that now. So realistically, 60, 90 days before he gets to the point where he can survey that, hopefully. That'd be the target for him.
So maybe the next,
By the end of, set like this, by the end of the summer, we would hope to have those lots available and into the market.
so in fiscal year 21, 22,
Correct.
we should be,
You should have those into the market, yeah.
all right.
Yep. The next one is the garbage fund. One of the things that we noticed when we looked at this is the line 4003, which is your transfer from the, so from the general fund to make that fund whole, right? So that it breaks even. So the theory behind the garbage fund has always been that it is a service that we're providing at as low a cost as possible to the citizens. And our contract has always reflected the idea that we are minimizing that cost. And so in order to break even with that fund, there's always been, as vacancies happen and turnover happens, you will end up a little bit short every year, right? And that's kind of cooked into the way the original contract was. Contrary to how that has been presented, that is essentially guaranteed in your contract that you're going to be short every year, right? And so you have to make that up with the general fund operating transfer. One of the things that we noticed is that transfer is increasing, and for some reason, quote unquote. And so what we have done is we've looked at Josh did a good analysis over the last 2 days, really, and did find an error in our side a little bit that we think will close that up in how we calculate the number of customers that we have. And so that number will close back up. Ideally, the way the contract is written, you would end up somewhere between $25,000 and maybe $40,000 just short. The new contract that is now advertised that will be in effect in FY '22 will look a little bit different in how we bill our customers, it will look a little bit different in how they are billed. The cost is going to be dependent on the cost of the contractor, what they propose. But we will the way the contract is written, we believe will narrow that gap just a little bit, probably to the $0 to $30,000 range rather than the $25,000 to $40,000 range. There's different things you can do with the garbage fund to try to guarantee that break even. And you can overinflate your rate to the citizen by a percentage, just a little bit. That's a philosophical thing, and if that's a direction that you want to go. So in other words, if you know you're going to be $20,000 short, and that's 1%, so that if you inflate your rate 1%, then you close that gap on direct costs from garbage, right? So, you know, you either fund it directly through the garbage fee, or you continue to operate and transfer a number to balance that out.
This is kind of like water and sewer where it just has to break even. We're not-
Our goal to the garbage fund historically has been to provide the service to the citizens as lowest cost as possible for them, right? So things that you do can drive cost up, and so, you know, you're in order not to drive up the cost from the contractor, which is going to be a direct cost to the citizen, you have always augmented that fund by a small transfer, right? Trying to keep that unit cost down. And so that's kind of complicated, but as we get the contract in this year, as it bids, which is, again, it's in the market now, so we'll get bids back in the next month or so. When we get those back, then we'll have that discussion more profoundly or a little bit more in depth. Hopefully and it will make more sense than it does now.
The recyclable materials, under revenue, it shows almost a flat line there.
Yep.
We're not getting any revenue back from the recyclables?
So that's misunderstood a little bit. Your contractor theoretically is considering that in their unit price. So right now, by giving by allowing that contractor the full benefit of that, when you have two contractors to bid, if one of them doesn't give the full credit of the revenue he's going to get from the recyclables, then he's not going to get the contract, right? So there is an element to what you've done. You do get that revenue, you just don't see it as a direct
Yeah, it
revenue.
keeps the price, the cost down.
It keeps the cost down, right?
Okay, all right.
Right.
And then the other question is that, we've had it for 10 years,
Close to it, yeah.
and the cost to me as an individual for 10 years has basically been the same. Might be time to take a look at that as well.
Well, and that is one of the things you can do if you want to attempt to close that number up some,
Yeah.
right? But you got to keep in mind, that's a philosophical thing,
I
right?
understand.
That's not just, oh, this has to break in. It doesn't have to do anything. It does what you all want it to do, right? And so if you can drive up the unit price that each individual pays and close that gap up directly from that charge, or you can get as close as you can and then kind of eat that last bit out of the property taxes. So it's up to you on how you
Well,
process it.
and if the charge to the city are these minimal numbers versus increasing the cost to citizens, I'd probably advocate to keep it the way it is, but it'd be worth the time to take a look at it. is
Yes,
what
sir.
I'm saying.
Yeah, and we'll do that. The new contract, we think, will be a
Jimmy
little
wants to
bit
increase
cleaner
taxes, not JH.
in how it's administered. And so we think that it will provide clarity to the vendor. So you'll get a more, and a flatter comparison for each vendor so that their cost is a little bit more known. So right now, a vendor might throw a higher unit price at you because he doesn't know if he's going to provide Kevin 3 cans or 2 cans, right? So how what we're doing is we're creating a situation where if Kevin wants 1 can, he's going to get this revenue. If Kevin wants 2 cans, he's going to get a little different unit price, but that's a known for the bidder. And so what they can do is then price each one based on their cost to collect 2 cans versus 1 can. And so then what happens is as the citizens get their service, if they sign up for 1 can, then that's the revenue he gets. If they sign up for 2 cans, then that's the revenue he gets. And that's our cost. So then also our customers would be billed that proportion charge. So it actually eliminates some of the fluff that the contractors has been needing to build in, which could contribute to a percentage of your overage, right? And so as we clean that up, it details it just another step down, which should narrow it in on just vacancies, right? Which is that $20,000 number.
And sort of related to this because it's on the same bill, are we going to try to go to monthly water bills?
Yes, we are going to do that as soon as we get the software changed.
Okay, I've had,
And we're working on that now.
suddenly I've had a lot of people request that.
Well, and it's totally reasonable. And right now, our target is July 1st.
Okay.
Right.
And those, the requests are coming from people on fixed incomes? And so
It
it's
helps
very,
a lot.
it's very difficult to pay something one month and not the next when you're on a fixed income?
Yeah, it helps a lot.
Okay, so it's coming.
That's the plan. Next is parking fund. It reflects kind of what you're seeing, which is a break-even operation. Sort of like a lot of things you do, sort of like the garbage fund, the parking fund is designed to be a break-even operation to the extent it can.
Do we need to look at raising the fees on this?
We can consider that. A lot of the revenue is built off of your rentals, and you're offsetting it with your general fund transfer like everything else.
So we collect somewhere in the neighborhood of between 13 and 25,000 in parking fines. What's the cost to collect that?
More than that.
I don't know that off the top of my head, Mayor. That's a valid question, but it's not just the cost for that same, so it's a little bit more nuanced than that, because for that same enforcement officer, you're operating the parking garage. You're doing, so it's not just as simple as, well, we have one employee and all those fines are attributed to that one employee. It's not really that simple. It's a little bit more complicated than that, which is why I didn't just start spouting off something.
I still see a lot of vacant parking on Main Street as well as lots.
Yeah, that's a philosophical discussion there too, right? Like, how you want to manage parking, what cost you want to associate. I would submit you do need someone to staff the parking garage, right? And so then to what extent do you manage everything else? It's up to you. But we can look into that as we get into the projected budget next year, when we get into that budget presentation. Some of the things we'll be doing is making, we will align things, and it's easier to talk about in the utility, for example. But when we went to Public Service Commission, they like to see known and measurables, not estimates, right? And so we have always handled things with that interfund transfer between the utility fund and the general fund, but that's based on estimates, right? And when we go back to the finance department, for example, they're paying the county out of finance $200,000 for the $180,000 for the collection of occupational taxes out of that budget. Well, the utility fund should not be paying 35% of that at all. In fact, it should pull that off of the cost of finance to begin with before you even start to calculate what the percent of finance is, right? And so then also, as you've added staff to do other general fund functions in finance, that number wasn't decreased, right? And so we will look at aligning the known and measurable things tied to the utility necessarily directly to the utility in this budget.
So
Right.
that's
We
one of
will-
the reasons that we have heard that utilities are upside down.
Well, we'll get into that in a little bit, and I'll show you, yeah, but so you could argue, yeah, I'll show you.
Okay.
We'll get to it.
Well,
Because we're about 2/3 of the way through anyway, of just these sheets.
Talking about parking again, are these fines only from the parking garage? Because codes counts the fines too. So,
That is parking-related fines as established by either codes or the parking officer.
okay, so the
Which is
codes, parking,
the parking officer is embedded in codes. Right.
so we're not, so this is total. This is not doubled somewhere else
No.
in codes
No.
budget? Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yep. That is the parking officer, although supervised by codes, say it like that,
Okay.
right? The next sheet is then the general fund revenue.
Wait a minute, I'm back up, man, I'm sorry. Debt service,
For the parking, for the parking?
parking fund, yep.
Okay.
Does it go away?
I don't know the year on that. There was a portion of that was refinanced, but eventually it does, and to be honest with you, I want to say it's like 2030-ish, 2034, something like that, but I would have to look and cite the exact.
So don't we need to carry some of those numbers through?
What do you mean?
Well, you still got,
There's zeros on the right because we are made the payment 100%.
wait a minute, zeros on the right.
So your right three columns will be, so when you got a debt service payment that you're making, you would have a zero variance on that. So the numbers on the right are variances.
Okay, I got
Yeah,
you.
yeah. So the next one is the general fund revenue. And we'll start at the top, taxes. We'll start at the bold line, the subtitle. If you'll look at the actual FY20 column versus the estimated FY20 column, which is your first two highlighted columns, we came in a little bit better than what we had projected, about $33,000 better. When we look at how that fit compared to the budget, it was a little bit over the budgeted amount for that fiscal year, even with the impact of COVID in the early part of the year. So when COVID hit, we reduced our projection by a good amount, and we were able to still beat that projection. And then as compared to the budget, we beat the budget. And so the year we're in, we're expected to see a positive variance as well over the budget. Now, what that means is that the property values are stable or climbing, right? And I think that's reflected in the market. Now, the next one is license and fees. That's where you really see a greater impact as a result of COVID, right? So let's start there with the middle column. Our actual revenue that we got from licenses and fees compared to the original budget was 12%, ended up being 12% under. So the impact of COVID on your original budget last year was about financially, or from a revenue perspective, was about $1.8 million. So we took a $1.8 million loss last year in revenue as a result of COVID. Now, what that meant to your operating budget, by the time we got to the fund balance carry forward, we ended up only being down $239,000 because we had adjusted mid-year as we went through the budget process, and we estimated the year end, and that became our operational target then for our budgeting purpose. But the middle column is the impact of COVID on your revenue.
And is that what the CARES money replaced, basically?
Exactly. Yep. It was seen as a revenue replacement and offset that number. Was designed to offset that number. And it gets pretty close. So now then the year we are in, what we are seeing is a recovery over what we were expected slightly. And so we expect that recovery to continue as we go forward. And part of it too is you did have an increase in the insurance premium revenue last March. Penalties and forfeitures or a service revenue, those items will typically be flat because a lot of that is contract work. Would like to point out for the purpose of this discussion, Kevin, we'll start with that interfund transfer there. If we peel out of, if you'll look online, 4595, right, in the year we are in, FY21, we had budgeted a transfer of $1.15 million. But if we eliminate from that the confused calculation, where we are not seeing the fully calculated known and measurable and push those known and measurables directly into the utility, so the cost doesn't go away. We're just moving that cost straight to the utility. How we should end up this year is about 675 on the transfer, right?
Okay.
And that's understanding that the utility fund is bearing the expenses that just went away, right? And so we're going to adapt that as a budget. And what you'll see this year, instead of on the utility side and just seeing the water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant, because we do have utility administrative staff, we will have a utility admin line where those costs are, and you'll have a utility admin department where the known and measurable costs tied to operation of the utility, that's where they'll land. And so this number should be adjusted based on those known and measurables. So for example, the billing clerk in the back that sends out your water bills, there is no benefit to having that as a confused calculation through your finance department, right? Make that a known and measurable. House that employee in the utility fund itself, because that's all they do. That 100% of their job is the utility fund. So you don't have to try to have a calculation, put that in the utility admin department, right? That's a known and measurable. So that when we defend our wholesale rate in the future, that was our glaring weakness in our wholesale water rate, is defending the interfund charge. We do not have a good defense of it because it is too heavily dependent on percentages, right? And not direct known and measurable expenses.
So there's no set formula to,
We'll get into it back in the back.
Okay.
On the utility fund. The formula is listed on that sheet, and we'll come back to that. But this is how it impacts the general fund, though. And so what my point is that you by doing that, you were eliminating that offset cost to the general fund, and ultimately your general fund is still whole, but you still have the expense.
right.
Right.
Oh, this is kind of off the subject too, but I know we got sued over our wholesale rate not too
Multiple
long ago. But is the most recent one, after we did the rate study, the cost study, everything, did it hold up?
Yeah, so the wholesale rate in 2015 is what is approved by PSC now. And so in the fiscal year we're going into, we will be looking at the water rates again. So
Okay.
COVID held up the completion of the sewer study about 9 months. That study is wrapping up right now, and so we would expect the cost of service for the sewer to come out this spring so that you can consider that during the budget discussion. And then in the next fiscal year, we'll do the verification of the cost of service for the water rates again.
Did we ever lose any of those? I mean, did our rates get upheld or verified,
We
I
went
guess?
in and had a rate presented. They reduced that approved rate some,
Okay.
but we
Okay, I got
we
you.
reached a point where that's all they were going to give us
Okay.
on the rate. Settlement, I guess you could say. So at the end of the day, on the general fund, the very bottom line, the totals line, three numbers at the right, when everything's considered, the FY20, the impact of COVID, all things considered, was $1 million under, which your CARES Act money was basically that. And then your projection versus the actual, though, is important, because in February, when we locked down spending, we projected how much the cost of the rest of the year would be, or how much money we would bring in for the rest of the year too, in a very conservative way. Turned out we received $363,000 more than we had projected. So at the beginning of the year, if you had a fund balance at the beginning of the fiscal year we're in, July 1st, we had projected to have a fund balance of, say, $1 million. In all actuality, you ended up with a fund balance of $1.3 million. Does that make sense? The year we are in, we are tracking in a positive variance as well, so that the revenues from the, all sources to the general fund should be a tick higher than what we had originally budgeted, to the tune of $376,000, right? And that does consider, Kevin, the reduction of that interfund charge to that general fund. So if you include that $440,000 as a direct revenue line to the general fund, that number would be $700,000 basically.
Gotcha.
Well, these projections were made, and also within the departments, they were made assuming everybody was 100% staffed and working 100%.
Yep, go to the next page.
And so that being said,
Go to the next page.
we kept almost everyone working though, this last year, correct? We didn't have a lot of people to take
If
the
we had an
leave
employee,
or
if you had an
unemployment.
employee, they were working typically. The reduction that you had was vacant positions. That was the biggest impact to payroll. The other thing is operating expenses, where we didn't do PM work that can contribute to other expenses, ancillary expenses. We sat on that and did other things that couldn't be a negative impact.
PM being preventive maintenance?
That is correct.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I thought you worked at night. I didn't know.
So for the general fund,
I just
this
figured
last
it out.
sheet, now, we have not gotten into the capital yet to try to establish, there's two things. One, we don't have the audit done, that we're expecting that very soon. But, so in terms of fund balance, we're not considering that today. We're looking at the net impact overall, right? The variance, and we're not looking at capital. So when we look at those last three columns, the very top set of numbers is we ended up with $300,000 more revenue than we projected, right? Below that, the 1.2 million is our expenses. So we ended up under our expenses by $1.2 million last year, right? So the cash position that you are starting from in the fiscal year July 1st, 2020, for fiscal year 21, you started from a cash position stronger to the tune of about $1.5 million, right? Versus the budget, though, you can see the full impact of COVID on the revenue, and then the net impact on expenses because you weren't doing anything, right? Like things were closed, which is a big number. I mean, we saw a 20% reduction in services, meaning that you saw a contraction of the overall operation of the city by 20%. And that's an impact, that is a derivative of the demand in the public sector, right, on our services. So we did, the impact of COVID was severe, right?
So you take the 2.374 and subtract the 1.058?
Well, those are budgeted numbers. Those are not that, but yes, the total, when you're trying to measure the impact of COVID, you saw a decrease in revenue and you saw a decrease in expenses. So the net impact was about $1.5 million, right? So the year we are in, we are still trending below budget. A lot of that is in terms of expenses down towards the bottom. A lot of that is in employees that are vacant positions. A big chunk of that comes out of the police and fire. But we are making strides in those departments. The compensation study will help that. But above that, you see a positive variance projection on your revenue by a small number. And so we feel good that the revenue's at least stabilized at this point and starting to tick up. Again, we didn't really try to get into capital. We really didn't try to get into below the line stuff yet. The next sheet is the utility fund. This is the revenue side. Same type approach taken here that is in the other departments. Would like to point out one number at the top of fiscal year 20 actual. There's a number highlighted with a different color, 3.9 million. if we'll take those two rows and look backwards to fiscal year 18, when the sewer rate was adjusted, the last time you had that sewer rate implemented was 16, which impacted that next budget year. The water and sewer should be about equivalent then after that. So if you'll see in FY 19, they were. The actual in FY 20 as of February was. Then we even estimated the year end of 20, but in all actuality, we had a severe drop in your water revenue. Now, I don't believe that's necessarily true. I think that's a variance in our computer system. Like, we need to make sure that FE has the full account of cubic at this time. I don't think it does, and I'll tell you why. Because those two numbers can't diverge like that, right? So in other words, we can't say, well, we had delinquents not paying their water bill, right? If you have delinquents not paying their water bill, they would also not pay their sewer bill, right? So we're investigating that, not because there's a problem, but because we want to make sure our information has been correctly transmitted from cubic to FE, right? Then the next column, the actual, which I think these are your real impacts of COVID, is seen this year, right? So in February of this year, you have your revenue that you've gotten to date, and then your projected revenue based on those two numbers are 4.3 and 4.3 roughly, right? So let's compare the actual revenue of this February to last February. So last February was pre-COVID, right? And so then this February is COVID, right? And so you do see an impact over the last 8 months particularly, and it is under where we were at this time last year by a couple $100,000 each one. So the net impact on the utility, if you look at the far right, is somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000 probably at this time in terms of actual revenue that we've lost. Does that make sense? Now, one of the things we will note is that actual revenue of February of last year was 3.1. The sewer revenue was 3.0. Actual revenue in February of this year is 2.9. Sewer revenue is roughly 2.9. So we go back to the actual revenue of FY 20. There's no reason for that variance. There's no reason for that diversion of revenue there.
So if you find a divergence, that'll tighten up those two numbers, and therefore the 200 and something thousand dollars that you just mentioned may decrease substantially.
Correct, right. So so the numbers then on the right side they close up to zero, so that the utility is operating basically on a break-even basis, which is what we say it does, right? Like so contrary again to we want the utility rate. Our philosophy in Danville, until you all change it, is that we want the utility cost to be as low as possible. It's not a revenue center for the city, right? Because we have so many customers outside of the city, particularly. And so
It is a revenue generator outside the city.
it does, yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so the
You mean it's a profit?
Profit, yes.
Yeah.
Profit, better said, yes.
yeah. And so then you do have a rate of return built into that, which is a number on the next sheet it'll show up. And so then are we concerned about the utility trend on revenue? The utility revenue is tied to demand, right? So if somebody wants a gallon of water, then we're going to have to generate a gallon of water, which means we're going to have the cost to generate a gallon of water, which theoretically would also mean we have the revenue to sell that gallon of water. So regardless if it's over or under, your cost trend tends to match very close to your profile of your revenue trend, right? Because unless you have the demand, you're not generating water. Now, there's a baseline cost that you can't go below.
Right,
Because
there's
you do have
fixed
debt
costs,
service, you
yeah.
do have all those fixed costs. But in general, the cost to generate the water generates revenue, right? So sometimes that's over budget, sometimes that's under budget, either direction. But theoretically, they both should be very closely married to each other, up or down.
Earl, item 4841, remind me what we did there in fiscal year 1920.
That was a reaction to the need. We borrowed that money. That money will be used to fund the wastewater plant. If you'll recall, we had a lot of very hastily active work towards a sewer line project, which is still on the books to happen. We just don't know when. That money was borrowed to fund that construction project. That did not happen. That was delayed as a result of COVID. And so we are shifting that money in the fiscal year we're in to fund the wastewater plant. So you will not borrow additional money for the wastewater plant necessarily, unless it comes in over this number. But you would then have to replace this money with another pot of money if that sewer line project ever comes back up.
So this was borrowed from where?
A bond, that was a bond issuance of a bond.
Didn't
was a
that
bond.
include the fire station?
The bond issuance was a little bit higher than that, and no, actually, I don't think that one did. There was a separate, there was a refinance that included the fire station.
Okay, so
Revenue.
it's separate
There was
number.
two different bond issues. One of them was a refi to the utility. Now, the important thing too, when you're looking at positives and negatives tied to the budget for the utility, the budget has been absorbing that debt service for that bond issuance without additional revenue to pay for it, right? So while we have been operating break even, we've had just enough money to absorb that cost, the cost of that debt service, and maintaining that debt service while we've been waiting for the cost of service study. Because right now, you didn't have, you borrowed that money, that project got pulled. That was a financial impact to the city, but we have absorbed that in our water and sewer rates, and we will use that to now fund the wastewater plant. Hope that makes sense, but that does contribute to your bottom line of your utility being flatter than it should be. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is occurring again in the fiscal year we're in. On paper, when you look at the budgeted numbers on the far right, you have a very negative variance tied to the Kentucky, the KIA loan, which we are not drawing that money in the fiscal year we're in necessarily. That is to fund the work on Perryville Road and the tower. So that will be a 1-to-1. So as you spend the money with the contractor, you'll incur debt, right? That loan, the revenue tied to that loan was considered originally in the last water rate adjustment. The sewer bond was not necessarily considered in the last cost of service study for the sewer system. So fortunately, we did have enough revenue consideration that was able to absorb that debt service through this period of time. But moving forward, that will be something that will be impactful in your upcoming rate study. You'll have to generate, if we have a break-even sewer rate, then we'll have to inflate that sewer rate to cover that debt. So we should at least anticipate that adjustment.
Am I incorrect in saying that sewer has to break even, or?
That is the operating principle, yeah.
By law.
And water has to pay for water and sewer has to pay for sewer, and they both have to break
We
even.
do not marry those two funds, right?
Yeah.
Public Service Commission, so when we get the wholesale rate approved, if you commingle those funds, then you're gonna have a challenge with PSC, right? So then moving forward, the water plant, give those guys credit out there a lot. They are coming in right now, under budget. Last year, when COVID shut down, they were able to really drive that number down by stopping some of the initiatives that he had started. The year we are in is a reflection of where he's sitting based on the minimum amount of work, and which right now we expect him to be under budget, a small amount, which is about 6%.
Interesting again on the overtime. It's very, almost non-existent.
Yeah.
I would have expected that to be more.
Water distribution, same thing. They are, there again, we stopped to the extent we could control costs. We stopped that, or we exercised that control, probably is the better way to say it. And, but right now, he's targeted, again, it's a break-even operation, and so they're really cut to as low as they can get to right now, to be honest. And we're propped up too because we had an employee not retire there. That was scheduled to retire. So we saved that money at the very top, $59.91. You can see that number fully absorbs that bottom savings. Wastewater Plant is doing good as well. It's trending slightly under budget. Did a good job of trying to recover through the spring of last year. And then the year we are in, which is your far right, then he's still trending in the same position. And he does have a vacancy that's helping with that.
The person that did not retire, were we able to keep them because of salary?
Yes,
Or-
specifically, yeah, to
Okay.
be honest, yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Sewer collection, this department will see an increase in demand for dollars over the course of time. Right now, they are not, they're basically essentially flat on their budget. They're even for all intent purposes. As we go forward in time, this will be a increased budget to comply with the issues tied to the sanitary sewer overflow program that the feds really want implemented, right? And so we will have to increase spending in this department over the course of time. Perryville, they're essentially even with their operation, which that's a easier budget to predict and easier budget to control.
But that's the one that's gonna have some real adjustment.
Over the course of time, that one right there could really be impactful to the sewer rates in Perryville. If we have to do that sewer project, this is the cost to operate that sewer plant in Perryville. Non-capital outlays, we really don't bill a lot to that anymore. Used to, you would paint water tanks out of this, do pump replacement out of this, which is, it's a hybrid of capital and your capital program is a little different than what this has traditionally been. We still keep it. Then the non-departmental. This is, Kevin, where we get into that interfund charge. If you read the text at the bottom, you've got 20% legislative, 35% finance, and 5% operating revenues. 5% is your rate of return, essentially for ownership. So then what is your true operating expenses? In the year we are in, FY '21, the decision was made to provide the utility director and the staff tied to that position actually as a direct expense into the budget, right? The interfund charge was not reduced to reflect that inclusion. It should have been, in my opinion, right? So traditionally, we say Josh is funded out of the legislative executive. Josh has nothing to do with the utility. Marshall is the utility director. He is funded out of the utility fund. Traditionally, I was housed in legislative executive. I did the utility director work while I was housed in legislative executive, which is why that formula. So that formula says that 20% of that cost was to operate the utility. So we no longer do that. We have a utility director that is embedded in that department as a direct expense. So that legislative number should go down to, say, 5%, right? And so then, as a percentage of finance, if we grew finance to look at taxes differently, for example, then if the scope of finance expands to general fund operations, then their percentage of their business they do with the utility goes down by percentage, right? So we did not make any adjustment to that percentage this year. But in addition to that, when we look at the finance budget, again, if you pull out just that number, that out of the So if you include the finance bottom line, you have a number that 35% represents. So if it's $100,000, it's $35,000, okay? If you pull out that $181,000 out of that formula, the transfer to the finance goes down $150,000
Right.
by itself, right? You know,
Right.
so that being said, we need to tidy up that formula because when you go into the Public Service Commission, you're not going to be able to defend that, right? And I'm sitting there under oath trying to, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so what we need to do is make sure any transfer we have is a direct, known, and measurable. If it's a rate of return, that's fine. If that rate of return needs to be 6%, set it at 6%, right? Whatever PSC will allow us to do. But that has to be a finite thing. That has to be a very defined thing. It can't just be a percentage of a department, right?
Gotcha.
So what we will do is, again, we will pull these wage and hour expenses out of non-departmental because it should have its own department. So the utility fund will have, you will see a utility admin department. It will have these costs. It will have the direct cost in finance that the utility causes, such as your front window, the cash drawers at the front. Those expenses need to be embedded in the utility admin because that's all they do, right? That's 100% of their function is that. So make that a known and measurable and clean up your formula so that you don't have a formula that you're trying to create a transfer to cover those expenses.
Understand. And we still get to pay the Kentucky River Authority for water we don't use. That's awesome.
That's been there a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So there's that. Then coming back to the general fund real quick, I did a quick graph that I can show, if I can get that to open. There it goes. So that's just your basic revenue profile for the general fund from 10 years ago to now. It's gone up a lot from all revenue sources. Some of it's taxes, some of it's property values have gone up.
And as I said to Ron, well, go ahead,
No, go
get
ahead.
of you. No, go ahead.
Well, and so going back to this, you can see
Yeah.
in FY '20, kind of the impact of COVID on the total system. So your revenue dropped that $1.7 million down to this number. And so you can see COVID, right? Like you can obviously see it.
I'd like to see two numbers backed out of that. I'd like to see inflation backed out of it. I'd like to see the two tax increases backed out of it.
Yeah,
I think that'll give us an apple-to-apple comparison.
yeah, that does make sense. Then this is just your basic expenses totalized. Your expenses have been growing. You've been adding staff and you increase salaries in this range. So you had an operational normal, then we started making salary adjustments and we started adding staff, and now we have kind of a normal. This is general fund.
I'd say you had an operational abnormal.
Well, and then, so this is general fund only, not utility. So then really, I want to just look at that comparison to each other. So your basic operating revenue or your basic operating expenses, you're under your revenue slightly. That doesn't include capital projects. That doesn't include community agencies and all the other things. But in terms of just raw operating the city, if you had to cut everything else out, then you still have a little bit of room over here on the far right to manage that situation with. That's kind of what I wanted to look at with that chart. At the end of the day, what's the bare minimum operating expenses based police, fire, public works? What does that look like? And then what does that look like against our revenue, right?
And see, the revenue number does include inflation.
Well, your salaries do too, and your cost of goods does too, and your expenses,
And I
right? So
get-
everything you're buying has been inflated naturally, right? And so your payroll cost has been inflated because they're,
Okay? then
Right,
just-
the
then-
net
then
impact
just
of
back out-
inflation
then
on
Just
the-
back out the tax increases.
yeah,
Okay.
right,
Now that would give you a true number.
yeah. And I'll send you these this little 3 graphs. I mean, you can do this for an hour. The thing is with these graphs, that is very helpful. And we need to do a better job with producing those because it gives you a visual and it's just very direct visual representation of what's actually happening, right? Your costs are going up. Your revenue has gone up consistent with your costs. At the beginning, we did have a rate, the tax increase there, which generated this number, but then we've been impacted by COVID, which brought us back down to ironically, the same number. Now, when we said before the FY19 number, you should be 90% of this peak by the end of this calendar year, so that by the end of the next fiscal year, you're going to know if you're going to be back up to a normal level or just below that.
Didn't we do our first, I don't know, first, but in the last 6 years, our first tax increase in fiscal year 15-16?
That would have been, this is an indication of that, the impact of that. So it depends on when it was implemented, when the revenue hit our books. Right.
Okay.
And then we did it
And the
again
next tax
year.
increase will show up where?
Well, it would have shown up here, but with COVID, it didn't show up at all. Right.
So,
Should have
we-
shown up in 18-19?
Should have shown up last year in FY20. Yeah, this number should be up here.
so COVID basically negated that.
This gap, yes, exactly.
We're right back where we were
Right.
before.
So you're right back where you were, but there again, like I said,
Could be a lot worse.
so, yeah, and so we'll get into that real quick, and we can come back to this if you want. I'll leave it open. But, so this guy is the director of a division at Huntington Bank. I don't know, what's that not work, PowerPoint? He might not have PowerPoint on this computer. I'll share this with you, and y'all can look at it and decide for yourselves. I bet that won't work. Yeah, so it's not opening correctly, but, so that's a presentation that the gentleman made. And at the end of the day, his prediction is that your revenue would get back to a more normal. I'll send that to you all, and y'all can read it on your own time and flip through it. It's really interesting. You would love it, Mayor. I mean, what he looks at is, and it takes an interesting take on federal spending and the impact to the local economy. And he was able to communicate graphically what the federal government, their goal is number of employees in the workforce. And so you are down and there's a graph that really depicts this real well. And the total number of jobs in the United States was a number before COVID. And as a result of COVID, the total number of jobs in the United States went down. And so since the first CARES Act stimulus and the recovery of COVID, that number's gone back up. But there's still a gap between the total number of jobs. And so he ignored the unemployment rate, right? Like just totally ignore the unemployment rate and look at number of people, number of jobs available, number of people that have jobs. Look at number of jobs, right? And he was looking at it from the perspective of what we're trying to do is close that gap back up to where we have the same number of jobs or more jobs than we had pre-COVID.
Did he break that down between governmental and non-governmental?
He did. And then he had then took a step down and looked at Kentucky very specifically. He targeted 10 cities in Kentucky. Somerset was one of them. Danville was not. Northern Kentucky was. Louisville, Lexington, Bowling Green, Owensboro. You know, just tried to pick geographically targeted communities, and also had some interesting slides on that where he talks about the same type thing, the same type of number of jobs in the market. And then there's some slides early on where you see the impact of the vaccines, right? And you know, yeah, I'd love for you to see those. I could probably export it as a PDF and get it up there probably in few minutes, but I don't want to hold you all up today.
Why don't you just
I'll email it to you, and that way you all can have it.
export to all of us, and then maybe we
Yeah.
can reconvene, and that'll give us a chance to kind of absorb.
I'll export it as a PDF so that it'll look like those charts, but it's really interesting. And he gets into global data and really what the prediction out of their bank, which they're out of Cincinnati, his branch is out of Cincinnati, and what his prediction is that, or what the trend with economists is that the United States is going to recover much more sharply than some of the other countries who are not as quick to implement the vaccines or as efficient at implementing the vaccines. So that's really all I got today. Take it with you, look at it, and we'll come back next week with a little bit different information. But hopefully tries to start to be a financial picture of where we're sitting. We'll try to get better cash balance, fund balance numbers by next Thursday, and at least have those for you to hold, even if we don't talk about those.
Earl, on the debt service, are some of these covered by revenue bonds? So
Yes,
some of them are paid for the service they provide.
that is totally correct, yes.
Could we get a list of which is which?
Okay, so what, we have a full debt service analysis done. The Compass Financial that does our bond issuance, they've assembled that for us. We will talk about that.
Okay,
And
all right.
we have a meeting where I want, not me to describe it for you, I want him to describe it for you, right? And I just don't know which meeting he's coming to. And it might be, if he's not anticipating one, he and I met, we picked a date, and to be honest with you, I just can't remember which date it was.
That's fine.
And so, which meeting that we were gonna try to get him at. But I'll talk to him again next week, and he may be at the one next week, I don't know. But it will be either on that one or the one where we have a discussion at a regular commission meeting. We may either have him at the meeting next Thursday or the next regular commission meeting, one of the two. But we will let him talk about that for you and describe your indebtedness position. You know, just a little bit of heads up, you're in a good debt position. You have a bonding capacity of about 130 million. You actually have debt against that capacity of about 45 million. So you're not necessarily in a debt-heavy position system-wide. Now, keep in mind, your water and sewer rates, your sewer rate is already bearing the debt service for an unintended debt of $10 million, right? Now, fortunately, it absorbed that, and but that is a break-even rate. So if you can't borrow money till you adjust the rate. That's normal, though. That's the hope, obviously, you don't have the money to borrow to pay for some huge project because it's a break-even rate. It's not designed to do that, right? So,
So our next meeting is a week
Next
from
Thursday.
today, 10
Yep.
a.m.
yes, sir. And the plan at that meeting, if this will come back on. So the next meeting, we'll talk about, the department heads will come in and talk about what they want to do for their own departments next year. The things that they feel good about in their budgets, what they feel bad about in their budgets, what they think is a concern in their budgets, what is not less of a concern. Then we'll try to do the compensation discussion, make the first presentation of that at next Thursday's meeting as well. So that will be Randy heavy.
Randy Heavy. I like that.
But the department heads will be here next Thursday. You won't hear as much from me.
Will that, I guess they'll go over their capital wish list, or we're gonna do
They'll-
that all at once sometime?
They'll talk about that during the, I would hope they would do that during their presentations. We've not given them an outline yet. We will. But the capital discussion, there's two types of capital. There's operating capital. So we expect the department heads to really dial in on those things. Do we need more guns and butter, that kind of thing.
Right.
But on the 1st of April, that meeting, we'll talk about the commission goals and objectives and the bigger capital construction projects, fire station,
Right.
park, whatever that is.
Very
So that will be in April.
So obviously, this is an entirely different budget meeting than at least I've experienced in 6 years. I think I'm comfortable saying on behalf of the commission, we appreciate the detail, the explanation of the detail, as well as the upcoming department heads and explanation. I don't think that's ever been done. It may be in Kevin's time or
Not
Jay's.
since
used to
not since
do it.
we've been here.
And last year at this time, I felt like I was driving 50 miles an hour in a fog because we had been told something, but we didn't know what we had been told, but time was marching on. So I appreciate what you're doing here and the way you're doing it.
Agreed. Thank you, Earl.
Yes.
You may.
Second?
Motion
Yes, sir.
made and seconded. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. See you next Wednesday at 10 a.m.
Next
If not
Thursday.
Thursday.
Next Thursday. at 10
Thursday.
a.m.
We
If
have a
not
regular
before.
meeting Monday.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, that's right, Monday.